Three friends, Alex, Ben, and Sarah, set out to camp in the woods on a crisp autumn evening. The forest around them was quiet, its serenity broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves. They built a fire, its warm glow pushing back the encroaching darkness, and looked up at a sky full of stars. As the hours passed, the fire's crackle softened and shadows deepened around their campsite. The night seemed peaceful, almost too still. They moved to prepare for sleep, their voices growing hushed as the fire's embers dimmed. Alex suddenly froze, his gaze fixed on the dense trees beyond the camp. A chill ran through him as he thought he saw movement in the shadows. For a moment, nothing stirred but the wind in the treetops. Then came a sound. Faint, deliberate footsteps crunching dried leaves. The group turned toward the noise, their unease mounting. From the shadows emerged a figure, a man, ragged and gaunt, his appearance disheveled and menacing. His eyes were wild, and his filthy clothing hung loosely from his frame. In his hand, a blade caught the firelight, its faint gleam making their hearts race. The man moved closer, his expression unreadable. Before the friends could react, he lunged. Alex raised his arm to shield himself, and the blade sliced through his skin. He stumbled, clutching his wound as blood seeped through his fingers. Ben and Sarah scrambled to help him, their movements frantic. The man hesitated, his gaze darting between the trio and their scattered belongings. His body seemed tense, but after a moment, he stepped back, retreating into the darkness without a word. His form vanished as quickly as it had appeared, swallowed by the forest. Ben tore off his shirt to staunch Alex's bleeding, while Sarah fumbled for her phone, only to discover there was no signal. Fear and urgency gripped them. They hastily grabbed their essentials, abandoning the rest, and began their retreat. The walk back through the woods felt endless. Every sound, the creak of branches, the rustle of undergrowth, heightened their terror. Their flashlights wavered in their trembling hands as they pressed on, driven by adrenaline and dread. At last, the forest thinned, and their car came into view as the first light of dawn stretched across the horizon. They climbed inside, locking the doors before catching their breath. Alex's injury was shallow, but left a deep scar, both on his arm and on their collective memory. The friends never returned to those woods. The man's hollow stare and the glint of his knife haunted their thoughts long after that night. Though they had escaped, the forest had forever changed them, leaving a shadow of fear that lingered long after the physical wound had healed. The couple arrived at the edge of the forest just before sunset. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. Towering trees surrounded them, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. They parked their car on a narrow dirt road and walked a short distance into the woods, carrying their backpacks and a small tent. The spot they found was perfect, a small clearing nestled between tall oaks, far from the main trails and hidden from prying eyes. They worked together to set up their campsite. The tent was pitched quickly, and soon they had a small fire burning. The glow of the flames painted their faces in warm light, and the crackling wood broke the silence of the forest. They ate a simple meal, laughing softly as the tension of the day melted away. As darkness fully enveloped the woods, they huddled close to the fire. The woman leaned against the man, their laughter turning to quiet conversation. Above them, the sky was a blanket of stars, the moon casting a silver glow on the treetops. The forest around them seemed alive yet peaceful, filled with the gentle rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Just as they began to relax completely, a piercing scream shattered the night. It came from somewhere deep in the forest, distant but unmistakable. The sound was raw and filled with terror. The couple froze, their smiles fading as their eyes met in alarm. A second scream followed, closer this time, louder and even more chilling. It echoed through the woods, bouncing off the trees and reaching them with unnatural clarity. The man stood, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight, while the woman clutched her jacket, her knuckles white. Then came the gunshots. 3 sharp, explosive cracks rang out, each one louder than the last. The sound seemed to carry through the trees, reverberating in the still air. After the final shot, silence fell again, heavier than before. The couple sat in stunned stillness, their hearts pounding in their chests. The fire, once a source of comfort, now felt like a dangerous signal, a beacon that could draw whatever was out there straight to them. Without speaking, the man grabbed a bottle of water and poured it over the flames, extinguishing them in a hiss of steam and smoke. In the sudden darkness, the forest seemed to close in around them. Every sound was amplified, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the rustling of branches in the wind. But then, amidst the natural noises came something else, footsteps. At first they were faint, almost imperceptible, but as the couple strained to listen, they became unmistakable. The steps were slow and deliberate, each one crushing leaves and snapping twigs underfoot. Whoever, or whatever, was out there was moving with purpose, and it was heading in their direction. Panic surged through them. The woman grabbed the man's arm, her nails digging into his skin. He motioned for her to stay quiet, his finger pressed to his lips. The footsteps stopped for a moment, then resumed, louder and closer than before. They couldn't wait any longer. Grabbing only their flashlight and car keys, they abandoned their tent and ran. The beam of the flashlight bounced wildly as they navigated the uneven ground, dodging low-hanging branches and stumbling over roots. The forest seemed endless, its shadows deep and menacing. Behind them, the footsteps quickened, the sound of pursuit unmistakable. The couple's breathing was ragged, their hearts racing as they pushed forward, driven by pure adrenaline. Finally, the dirt road came into view, and with it, their car. The man fumbled with the keys, his hands trembling, before unlocking the doors. They threw themselves inside, slamming the doors shut and locking them in one swift motion. The man started the engine, the roar of it breaking the silence. As the car sped down the narrow road, they dared to glance in the rearview mirror. The forest behind them was dark and still, but the feeling of being watched lingered, heavy and oppressive. They drove for miles before they spoke, their voices hushed and trembling. The tent, their belongings, and their plans for the weekend were left behind in the woods. But they didn't care. All they knew was that they had escaped. Yet, even as they reached the safety of civilization, a question haunted them. Who or what had been out there in the woods that night? And what had become of the source of those screams? Two friends, David and Michael, had been inseparable since childhood. They shared countless memories, from exploring their neighborhood as kids to traveling together during college. But life had pulled them in different directions. David moved to the city for work, while Michael stayed in their hometown, enjoying the quieter pace of life. Years passed with only occasional messages and calls between them. Both missed the bond they once had. So when David suggested a weekend hike in the woods where they had often gone as teenagers, Michael eagerly agreed. The evening was calm, with the air carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves. The forest trail stretched ahead, winding through dense trees that whispered softly in the breeze. It was the kind of peace they both longed for. As they walked, their laughter echoed through the stillness, reminiscing about pranks they'd played and adventures they'd had. The world around them felt timeless, as though no years had passed since their last hike together. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple before surrendering to darkness. They had brought flashlights, but the moon's faint glow provided just enough light to see the trail. The forest, now shadowy and mysterious, seemed to embrace them in its quiet solitude. After about an hour, they heard something. It started faintly, like leaves crunching underfoot. Both paused, their laughter silenced. Michael raised a hand, signaling David to stop walking. They stood still, listening. The sound came again, soft, rhythmic, and deliberate. "It's probably an animal," Michael whispered under his breath, as if to himself. David nodded, though unease prickled at the edges of his mind. They pressed on, trying to shake the growing tension. The sound of their boots on the trail seemed louder now, almost unnatural against the oppressive quiet of the woods. Then, it happened. A loud crack shattered the silence, followed by the unmistakable boom of a gunshot. David stumbled and fell to the ground. At first, Michael thought he had tripped, but when he saw the dark stain spreading across David's shirt, reality struck him like a bolt of lightning. "David!" Michael's voice was trapped in his throat. He dropped to his knees beside his friend, his hands shaking as he tried to assess the wound. The bullet had struck David in the chest. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the forest floor. David's breaths were shallow and ragged, his eyes wide with terror. "I'll get help," Michael stammered, but even as he said it, he knew how far they were from civilization. The nearest town was miles away, and his phone had no signal. Panic coursed through him. He pressed his hands against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, but it was no use. David's body trembled, and then he went still. His eyes stared blankly at the canopy of trees above. Michael froze. His mind refused to accept what had just happened. His best friend, his lifelong companion, was gone. The warmth of David's blood on his hands jolted him back to the present. Another crackle of branches nearby sent a wave of terror through him. Whoever had fired the shot was still out there. Adrenaline took over, and Michael scrambled to his feet. He ran blindly, crashing through bushes and stumbling over roots. The forest seemed alive, its shadows reaching for him as he fled. His lungs burned and his legs screamed for rest, but he didn't stop until he burst out of the woods and onto an empty road. Once he reached safety, the weight of what had happened hit him fully. He collapsed to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Images of David's lifeless body haunted his mind, the blood, the fear in his friend's eyes, the sudden silence after his last breath. It all replayed over and over. Days turned into weeks, but Michael couldn't escape the memories. He couldn't sleep without hearing the gunshot or seeing David's face. Guilt consumed him. Why had he run? Why hadn't he stayed and tried harder to save him? Michael avoided the forest, unable to even glance in its direction. He stopped hiking altogether, and his once adventurous spirit was replaced by a heavy, constant anxiety. He often woke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, gasping for air. Therapy helped him piece his life back together, but the trauma lingered like an open wound. He carried David's memory with him, both as a reminder of their bond and as a weight he could never fully lift. And though time dulled the sharpest edges of his pain, the forest would always remain a place of darkness, both in his heart and his mind.